Hello and welcome back to PHL Cup. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Morgan. How are we doing?
Doing great. Thanks, Manny.
Love it. Again, we've kind of been talking for the past 50 minutes, maybe almost an hour.
Yeah, I thought we were recording.
Um, but for those who are listening in that perhaps don't know or have never heard of you, if you give us a quick breakdown on essentially what got you into strength and conditioning and what you're currently up to.
Well, I got into strength and conditioning. You could argue when I was in middle school, and we had like a record board for our middle school on track and field accomplishments, and I saw them and I wanted to beat them. And the internet was just coming out, and so I just looked up how to run faster, and stumbled upon this website called XRX, which I think still exists, and it had a bunch of calculators on like how to like run faster, jump higher, and I started playing with this thing in attempts to trying to run faster, and that was kind of where the bug started. But it wasn't really cultivated until uh, in high school when I started wrestling, when I was caught sneaking into the weight room as a way of like training for wrestling practice and just to improve my performance. And one of the coaches was like, if you're going to spend your time in here, you might as well do it right. And then they handed me the essentials of strength and conditioning, the NSCA text. I was a sophomore in high school and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And after that, I was like hooked. I was hooked in science. I was hooked in strength and conditioning. It gave me the burning question that I needed to like want to pursue this field with like the vigor that I have still to this day. And, uh, and so that's how I got into strength and conditioning. And now currently I work as a strength and conditioning coach for the Chinese Olympic wrestling team. And I've been here for the past 3 years, where I got my start with the team qualifying them for Paris and then going to the Olympic Games in Paris. And then my contract has been extended as a result of our performances there.
Nice. What's it been like sort of going from an American system to the Chinese system? Obviously, I'm kind of unfamiliar with the whole process on how the sport sort of gets developed across there. But what are some differences that you found from that US system to the Chinese system?
Gosh, I mean, you're comparing apples to oranges in terms of like how athletes get going in wrestling in general versus how they make their way to the Olympic team versus the methods for training. It's like every thing about it is completely different. And I mean, gosh, it's like even the mentality, it's like where do I even start about this? I mean, first of all, in the US, wrestling is all self-driven. Athletes self-select. They put themselves in they choose to go to high school. They pursue it through high school, ultimately through college. And if they want to continue to progress, they can continue to wrestle after college and internationally, or in college and go internationally. And then they just compete. Whoever wins, they go to they'll make the Olympic team or the national team. And USA Wrestling essentially gives them the resources or coaching in order to fulfill their goals. And so in the US, it's athlete driven, where the coaches are there to support the athlete as an individual and direct the athlete toward with their goals with respect to the athletes, their own aims, etc. The national team and the coaches, obviously they impose their professional opinions and they have a plan on what to do, but ultimately it's more of a balance there. And in China, it's a state-run process all the way from the beginning to the end. And so an athlete will typically choose, they may or may not choose wrestling. Usually a school will kind of like, they'll be in school at a young age, and then the school identify that they're a good athlete, and then they'll have the option of going into a sporting school. And that will then put them in an avenue for the rest of their lives in sport, in education, or in sport, and then education comes second. So it's like in the US, it's student athlete. In China, it's athlete student. And essentially, you have two processes. There's a push pull. Sometimes the communities will push an athlete up to a higher level. Sometimes higher levels will pull an athlete up. So like if a province identifies a good athlete, they'll pull them up to their team. If the national team identifies a good athlete from a province, they'll pull them up to the national team. Or sometimes the opposite happens. The province will push an athlete up to the national team for development. And so there is this kind of like process in terms of how athletes are developed. And that's one of the ways that it's different between the United States and China in terms of how
Yeah.
they're in
With
terms of how
with how, your kind of career has came up and through, what's some things that like keep firing you up to, become better at what you're doing for the athletes themselves? Here's a quick word from our sponsor, Team Builder. I've personally been using Team Builder since 2022, and it's genuinely changed how I run primitive athletics. Writing programs, delivering them to the clients and athletes, tracking their progress, and it all lives in one place. My clients get their sessions on their phones. I see their progress, I get messages from them, and we are able to stay in constant contact and be able to track every single metric that I need. I spend less time on admin and more time actually coaching. Check out teambuilder.com, and if you use promo code PACHUCKUP all together, you get 30-day free trial and you get access to the AMS system.
Gosh. Well, number one is that I always want to provide the highest, best quality training that I possibly can. And to me, it's like, it's almost kind of personal because I originally got the bug in strength and conditioning when I was reading that textbook in my sophomore year of high school. Essentially, they were saying that, like, if you want to be a sprinter, you shouldn't be running a mile. If you want to be strong, you shouldn't be doing long distance. And I was like looking at this and I was like, yeah, but in wrestling, you're supposed to sprint for 6 minutes. You're also supposed to be strong. You're also supposed to be flexible. But here it's saying that there's an interference effect. And at that time, actually, interference effect and concurrent training weren't really terms yet. It wasn't even in that edition of the textbook. It was just like, they were just like, the things don't go together. And I was just like, but we're doing it in wrestling every day. How do we do this then? And like, what is the best way to do this? And that has been the burning question that ultimately led me to get an education in strength and conditioning. And for wrestling. And for me, this question has just always been so interesting to me that I just am so interested in the outcomes of the athletes and in the outcomes of the athletes training. Then on the flip side, wrestling has changed my life. It has taken me from low lows and put me in a point in my career which I am so thankful and grateful to be at, that I am forever indebted to this sport. And I think wrestling is a beautiful avenue to reveal character, to develop character, and to really create a unique experience in life that other things don't really afford you. And so I really think that I have the ability to help at to I don't want to say help athletes, but guide athletes to realize the beauty of life through this sport. And I think that when one can kind of give themselves to their sport with their best effort and try to trust their process and trust their development, it allows the perspective of life to open up through their efforts to the sport. And so I feel responsible to ensuring that my athletes have a holistic development and have a fulfilled experience with their training. And then I also am a diehard competitor and I want to win at all costs. So I'm just like cutthroat about how hard and how well and how effectively we're doing our training. And so I kind of create this like yin yang for myself and for the athletes in terms of the efficacy of the development for their performance, but also for themselves as a human.
I think as well, when we're talking wrestling, you're kind of having to put your body through a lot of shit. I think that's the best term. And I kind of like what you were talking about with the concurrents and absolutes in this field, and I think this is kind of more where, again, our good friend and mutual Bo, we were kind of talking about, like, there's these absolutes in this industry where
Yeah.
it's a little bit more different than that. Like wrestling, we'll take for example, you need strength, you need power, you need endurance,
Yep.
you need speed. Like you need the whole box.
Everything.
I'm a rugby athlete. I needed strength, I needed power, and I needed endurance, and I needed speed. I was a forward, right?
Yeah. Cool.
Speed can only come so much to a forward, but anyways, like it's something that we need. But then when you do look at these textbooks, it's like to develop power, you need the block of four or 6. And then to develop something else, you need another 4 or 6. But personally, I've had to program for preseasons that are 3 weeks long. How the fuck does one develop all these qualities in 3 weeks? You kind of have to fucking throw everything together and hope it works.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an art form to preparation for sure.
100%. So, like, there was a recent conference I spoke at, and I was speaking about conditioning. Now, everyone knows what conditioning is. Some place an importance on, some don't. I do personally. The fitter you are, the quicker you are to recover, the more adaptation we can chase. That's how I look at it. So, I'm a big fan of repeated sprint ability, whether that's on assault bike, ski erg, rower, on sprints itself, any type of conditioning equipment. And I like to make my presentations interactive. So if I'm talking about something, we're going to program and then we're going to talk about them. So the challenge is you program and then we come together and we talk about it. And they did. Then they put out some ratios. I think it was like a 1-to-2 ratio where they sprinted for, or yeah, it was a 1-to-2. So they sprinted for like 10 seconds at 20 seconds rest. And at the end, when we had finished the session, there was a guy pointed at the board and he goes, "That's too little rest time." I'm like, "What do you mean by that?" And he was like, "Well, like that's not quick for any type of replenishment to occur." And I was like, "Okay." So he was soccer, i.e. football athlete, and I was like, "Okay, so if we make a break for it, I pass to you, you pass to me, and we run for like 15 seconds, are you going to stop and just be like, 'Hey, it's fucking rest time. Let me rest, and then we'll go back to this break?'" And then he was like, "Well, no." I was like, "Well, do you not think we kind of need to train like that?" Today's episode is sponsored by Eccentric. You all know I'm a big fan of keeping training simple and effective, and flywheel training fits that perfectly. Now, I've been using Eccentric K-Box since 2021, and it's one piece of equipment, endless exercises, and resistance that adjust to you automatically. However much effort you put in is what you get out. No guessing the weight, no loading plates, just move. And the flywheel matches your effort perfectly. Check out the K-Box or the K-Pulley at the link in the description.
Yeah. It's got to be specific. It's got to be specific to the demands of the sport and the circumstances you'll see. Otherwise, you're leaving something to be desired.
100%. And it's the same as, so kind of to the point that you were talking where like, how did you then start thinking about programming for wrestlers where there is all these crazy demands all happening at once?
Well, the key is in physiology, in understanding the mechanisms behind the adaptations. What are the stimuli and what are the downstream adaptations? And then even a little understanding of genetics and epigenetics helps there, because if you know what kind of adaptations and what the mechanisms of that adaptation are, you can create timelines for how they occur. And those timelines essentially have to be considered in your training. And that's the key in my philosophy. Then it has to do with layering and complementing and contrasting these adaptations such that you create you create a synergy and agonism antagonism between these things to get the desired response at the respective phase. And the reason I'm speaking kind of so esoterically about it, because there really isn't a correct answer. It's always prioritized with respect to your strategy. And so the strategy is the number one thing that aligns everything else that follows. And then you can orient the training in such a way that you know what the effect that you're going for is and how those effects lead into each other, which, Mike Stone would appreciate if you've had how adaptations have to layer into each other in order to create the desired outcome, and that you can have this sequential development that enables a specific desired outcome.
100%.
And I really appreciate these things in terms of the methods that I like to use.
So what does the training sessions kind of look like when you are programming for these athletes within like kind of micro to a macro cycle?
Gosh, so within the macro cycle, we're looking at our competitions and how do we need to show up at our competitions with respect to the fitness that we need with respect to the strategy that we have. We have everything is broken down. I like to call it the rock, paper, scissors of the rock, paper, scissors of strategy. And it's based upon Sun Tzu, the famous author of The Art of War. He said, a strategy without a tactic is the slowest march to victory. Tactics without strategy is the silence before the noise. Or did I say that right? The noise before defeat, excuse me. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat, which is kind of like silence in a sense too. But pardon me. And so ultimately, how do I plan the microcycles and the macro cycles? The macro cycles always respect to the strategy. Then we have our triple component of our rock, paper, scissors, which is technical, tactical, physical. And there's not one component that's better than the other. They all have to work together in synergy in order to serve your strategy. Now, the reason I say they work together is because one can always beat the other. It's always like a tactical wrestler can beat a technical wrestler, can beat a physical wrestler, can beat a tactical wrestler. And it's all the same. So, and 2 out of 3 can beat, if you have 2 out of 3 qualities, you're good. If you have 3 out of 3, then you're even better. But it's a matter of identifying where the holes in that game are, and then the physical element of that has to serve the tactical technical component. And so the macro cycle is the zoom out of this. The micro cycles are all about the adaptations and the timelines of those adaptations, such that they can reach the timeline, such that they can occur within the timeline that you need them to layer into each other, so that way you can perform on the days that you need to.
Yeah, and with that kind of being the sort of full-time position, how does that sort of gear them up for the Olympic cycle and for these very, major competitions that they're really striving for?
This preparation is everything. It's full time. We're always working these skills and these components, and we're doing it very, very hard. We have to, our team has a philosophy in terms of how we emphasize certain elements of our training in order to yield the best results. And I guess that's the sauce, right? That's the sauce of our training methodology, so to speak. Is that kind of answers your question?
We're back. We had some technical issues, but all sorted now. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about what are some good ratios for wrestlers to sort of improve their performance on the mat and in the weight room.
So wrestling, for a wrestler to improve their performance in competition, there has to be a good balance between strength training off the mat and mat training. And I could talk about this forever. So I'm going to start kind of broad and then I'll get specific. So just bear with me here on this one. First of all, like I mentioned before, the strategy of the wrestler is super important, because ultimately the strategy dictates the training priorities and the emphasis. Like if you're going to have a strategy that's going to be very physical, then you need to have then your physical training needs to take precedent, and it needs to have more of a frequency within your training week in conjunction to your mat training. And then they have to work together such that your physical training doesn't interfere with your mat training too much, because ultimately there will be interference there. Because, well, first of all, the more physical training you're doing, the more fiber type changes you're gonna experience as you're training. So that has to be considered. So generally speaking, like I would say a high frequency for wrestlers is 3 times per week. If you start getting over 3 times per week, you're going to start seeing that physical fatigue carry into your wrestling practices in a way that it should be considered integrating them together, such that if you need to do more, then you've got to start integrating your physical training actually into your wrestling practices too. But like, you can maintain your strength off of 1 training session a week. You can definitely build your strength off of 2 sessions per week, and you're definitely going to be able to build strength off of 3 sessions per week. But now you're going into the territory of there's going to be a high volume demand. There's going to be a higher volume, assuming that you're adding frequency. I mean, you could add frequency in order to increase the volume, or you could add frequency to decrease the volume and spread it out across the week. So this is also another training strategy that is important, where it's like if you actually need to improve your recovery, then you could actually consider spreading out your big sessions over 3 little ones. And this is actually one of the methods that can be used. And when I was training with Team USA, I had a special group of athletes that we were actually training 5 days a week, physical training, but the training was way shorter and it was taking place before the day earlier in the morning. We called ourselves the Sunrise Shredders. And we would do this. And what this enabled us to do was to get a quick microdose session in the morning. And then we would have our wrestling technical training, and it spread out our physical training across the week such that we never had these peaks and valleys of fatigue that occurred. It was a slow onset of fatigue that occurred towards the end of the week. And it was more predictable. But like I said, these types of things, they never happen in a vacuum. They're always progressed from phase to phase, week to week, month to month. And you could take approaches of it in block periodization or in microcycles, depending on the phase that you're in or the period that you're in. I'm a big fan of periodization and how you in sequencing training, just because I like to micromanage these fatigues in this fatigue in chunks, and also create predictable systems of load management. There's a real big push nowadays towards reactive type. Oh, how is an athlete feeling? Okay, I'm going to pull back on the load. I see that it's going this way. I'm going to push on the load. This can really work, but I think that that's got to be ingrained into your training strategy, and the whole system has to be oriented in this way. And it's not better, it's not worse. It's just another strategy.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to say. So, in theory, I disagree with you. I'm more of a not reactive periodization. It's more let's have options. So, like for
Yeah.
every program I write, there's 2 or 3 different options that depending on how they come in, and it's reactive to how they come in, yes, but the goal is still overall the same. Like I still need them to push. And like I've been
Yes.
openly on this that I need my athletes to last a game and a half. Like that's
Yes.
like I can't have you gassing towards the end of the game. I need your minute one to be the same as your minute 80. So it's like
Yes.
there's still times where you have to push regardless of how you feel.
Yep.
But in saying that, if I know that there's things lingering in the background, I'm going to take it a little bit easier. But I do agree that it's not the only system or the best system. It's just my system, and I like how you
Yeah.
feel that as well.
Yeah, there's no such thing as the best, because it's a matter of what you can coach well and what your athletes can be coached well with. And this is the thing, is that that's the art of coaching, is that at the end of the day, like there's still this X factor of like, what is the system that you can manage, and how does it fit into your training model? And this is why I like to just say that it doesn't matter. You can argue to your blue in your face, but ultimately there's a lot of studies that just say, all things considered, as long as the volume is accumulating over time, then you're going to progress, then the muscles are going to adapt to it. So it's a matter of, what are the qualities that you're progressing over time, and how is the body, mind, and spirit responding, as well as the sport abilities too, because that's another thing too, is that the sport abilities also are being trained in conjunction with whatever it is that you're doing. So you have to make sure that those things are working together as well. So
You
I
guys, you
appreciate
touched
the
on
approach.
something interesting before as well, and I kind of want you to dive in a little bit.
Yeah.
So we were talking about like the strategy focused training, but for athletes and coaches, how do you sort of determine what kind of wrestler you are, or like what kind of strategic athlete you are in the wrestling to determine what then you focus on in the weight room?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's some like obvious strength and conditioning answers, and then there's some not so obvious strength and conditioning answers, and more into the weeds of the sport. So first, it's like you got to have your needs analysis of like, where is the athlete, like where's their fitness? And the way that I like to look at fitness for wrestling is that you got your advantage, you got your neutral, and then you got your disadvantages. And we've got like, and there are certain standards that exist, that are based upon, what have Olympic champions have earned, or how have they performed physically with respect to their physical fitness standards. For example, like Hamid Suryan is like a 2-time Olympic champion, 4-time world champion. He could do like 50 pull-ups in a row, but his back squat was 1.8 times his body weight. with
Yeah.
respect to, and then also like his bench press was like 1.25 times his body weight. The VO2 max was like 56 milliliters per deciliter per kilogram of body weight. It's like these are good numbers, but they're nothing was like it's not like, it's nothing to like be, they're not superhuman, right? But this physical fitness ability was suitable to his technical ability. And so the first thing is that you just have to see if there's any outliers that don't fit into the norms. And those what are the ways that you could, things that are going to get, well, one of them are data points in terms of like the quantitative analysis of your strategy. And then you have a qualitative analysis of your strategy. Lastly, most importantly, is your coaching philosophy. Your coaching philosophy dictates how you lead that ship, depending on how these, follow upon. And I've got on
We have time. This next question is going to sort of touch a little bit more on that, but I believe in a bucket filling system. And again, not all buckets need filled, and I will stand firm on that. But you kind of need to also work on your weaknesses as well as your strengths. So with, identifying your strategy and, working on ratios to sort of better that style of wrestling, have you seen much benefits in learning different strategies and sort of knowing how they can benefit your overall game?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, like in my experience as an international wrestler, I was able to travel the world for over 12 years and wrestle internationally, maybe their strategy in Sweden. That strategy. So, and I've seen, know the reactions, know the responses, and get creative to find new ways. That's their strategy of using their technique to their advantage.
Yeah. I think as well, again, the biggest countries for wrestling are US, Russia, China, Georgia, like some of those Eastern European countries.
Yeah.
But the strategies that they employ are a little bit different. And again, we also kind of have to give a nod to the Soviet system of training because that's kind of where a lot of our methodologies came from. How does that sort of also shape the way that you look at programming in general?
It's like, a bunch that have did these foundations, data collection, and the importance of period, but they're also be very, very scientific in their training where they were managing their loads, they were managing they had exercises that were oriented in a specific sequence. And also they were pushing their athletes to the limit harder than we can imagine. And like, they as, as a nation, the Soviet Union has more gold medals than all the other nations. I mean, especially in wrestling. And a lot of that is like they had the ability develop movement vocabulary, training sequencing, training scheduling, training frequencies, recovery modalities, mental models, and tactical approaches. And from it in the way that it does its training. And Chinese weightlifting is successful, and their influence came from the Soviet Union. That time they were exchanging information at that level to those.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been recently on a pursuit of figuring out what old texts were saying in terms of strength training for general and overall. And this is one of the books I'm reading currently. So it's Strength and How
Sandow.
Sandow, yeah. And this book is from 1897. So it's interesting, like reading back to what they were doing and like what we're currently doing. And I mean, I got this book a couple days ago, so I've not properly gone into it. But the first bits I've read, it's talking about like a specific training routine in between each set or like each tier, we'll say the person jumps into an ice bath. Then they come out and do the next set or the next tier, and then they jump back in the ice bath, and then they go back. And it's interesting because like now we don't necessarily do that specific thing, but we do like we strength train. We go ice baths or recovery modality. So it's like it's interesting like how still in 1897 they were talking about tapping into that recoverability during sets to optimize performance. I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I also I've not properly opened them yet, but it's what's the name? Yeah, it's fascinating. Forget the first name, but it's Atlas, and he wrote these series of letters to his students. There's 13 of them, and it talks about his approach to health and fitness. It's like it's a little bit more bodybuilding, but it's still talking about like the fundamentals of it, is training and sets, reps, nutrition, so like I've got these letters that I'm going to go through them, but it's fascinating. Like again, what you're saying is like what was old is coming back in, and they kind of just pendulums the whole time.
I know what you mean by going back to the old texts. There's a romantic element to looking at the old strength and conditioning textbooks because, they had what I always liked when reading those old book or reading old strength and conditioning texts is that they didn't have research to read about these sort of things. And so I like to hear everyone's rationale behind why they think what they're doing is a good idea. And to me, this is just fascinating to see like what are the insights and the thoughts about why to do these things and what are the ideas that people had in a vacuum.
Uh-huh.
And it's really quite interesting, because it's like, some of them will talk about like, oh, you like train it at it and will get response. And and tuition tuition that came in coming up with these ideas. And like another really good one that I appreciate, I forgot the name of the guy, but it's around the same. He's like in the circle of Hackenschmidt and not Atlas, Sandow, but he essentially wrote a book about mind muscle connection, and where it's like the whole thing is about him squeezing the muscles and feeling the fibers and trying to do all these things in order to coordinate the muscles better. And lo and behold, it's like we find out that the more you train your muscles and the more motor unit recruitment. So it's like it's all the same.
100%. So I always, again, I had to sit through a hard conversation with one of my lecturers, and I think really early on I was making definite statements. So like, so I saw things work, and I was like, "Oh, this definitely works. Then this is it." And my lecturer kind of sat me down and was like, "Look, I understand what you're saying, but it's all hypothetical. Like, it might not work with everyone." And like that was kind of hard because I was like, "No, it fucking works. It just works." And he was like, "I get it, but all these things are just theories. Like." The best thing that we can do, and it's kind of a conversation I had with Mike Stone, and it's like I essentially asked him like, what is your goal of researching, and how do you sort of live up to, the quality of research that you've done? And his thing was, well, to make sure, like, to prove something, you have to do it so many times that you get the same results and it just works. So like he's done so much research on block periodization in all different types of walks of life and all different methods, all different things. But he knows block periodization because he studied it so much and he's done so much with it that it's built that validity for it. And that's why that's one of the main, training methods that we or periodization models that we talk about. It's like it just works because he's done so much on it. But it's kind of like we kind of also have to talk about the interpretation from each other. So how I might read block periodization might be different to how you read block periodization, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and again, I spoke to Mike about this, and he did. We kind of came to this conclusion, and I it kind of led to a different question sort of answer. But it's like you also have to listen to your interns because their interpretation of things isn't as jaded as yours is. So like you might have this profound because you've seen it work and you've seen it happen this way. But it might take an intern to say a specific phrase or specific way of wording it that you're like, oh yeah, actually, I've never thought about it that way. And it's interesting because like you have this, but yeah, this so essentially it's like listening to interns and making sure that one they know where they might run into these issues, but B like you also listen to them and see if you've only approached this certain topic one way.
I mean, the interns are the fresh minds to help give perspective to things. So do you have an instance where somebody asked you a profound question about your training that changed the way that you thought about your training and your methodology, or the way you did things that shifted your paradigm?
Not so much them asking me a question, it was when I was an intern and I asked certain questions. So anything I do, I always extrapolate however much I've invested in it. So if I've invested money, I want to make that back. So when I was able to get to the US to learn from coaches, I saw that as an investment. And my second goal was I need to make sure that they remember me by the time I finish. So I asked questions every day to the point where the coaches were like, "What's your question for today?" Before I even did anything. And it was giving me that space to talk. And then from the back of it, if they saw that I had a point, they would make changes accordingly. So it was that thing where I was listened to. If I had a point, it would change. So it was kind of like, again, I wasn't fucking clueless. Like I knew what was happening, I wasn't just saying shit to say shit. But it was yeah, it was sort of like having that space where coaches allowed me to ask questions, and if I had a point, there would be the appropriate steps for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was just curious. Was there a question that you explicitly remember asking a certain question that brought a change that had a downstream effect that you didn't anticipate, maybe good or bad, or just something that you didn't expect?
There's two, and one of them, so it's very simple. It's more logistics than anything else. So we're doing Z presses on the floor, and I was like, "Are we going against the rack or like out with the rack?" So I like, "Are we pressing and facing the rack or away from the rack?" And then there was other things happening within the rack, and I was like, "Well, if we face away from the rack, I'll give that person enough space to move, whereas we can still do our Z presses here. Then our third and fourth exercises can happen elsewhere." And they're like, "Yeah, no, let's change that. Let's go face away from the rack." And then it's more of a funny one. It's more of a funny one. We were it was Red Room, it was the 4th of July workout, and again, strength coaches are all type A mostly, right? We love our opinions and, making sure that we're heard, and Coach Mark turns around and is like, "I mean, we've all got different options, but guess what? Mine's the one that matters." Well, it was kinda that thing where, like, although I can have these great ideas, it's also, like, knowing when to listen to them and when to like, okay, make the executive decision and let's do this instead.
What was your most fond memory of being an intern?
I'm a little psychotic. I'll preference this, but one of my missions was to make sure that they remembered me when I left, and that I can call any of them now and they'll answer. So it worked, but it was knowing that they saw me as an integral part of the program. Like I wasn't just an intern. Like they ended up giving me a good amount of responsibility while I was there, and I think for that to happen, I had to check a lot of boxes, which then validated my choice in the career path I've taken, if that makes sense.
So what did you do in order to really integrate yourself and make yourself integral into that program? Because, you're coming in as an intern and there are people that are supposed to tell you that into the framework requires some bigger picture thinking into their system. So what was it that you recognized that you needed to do in order to fill that gap?
So I'll again preference a preference. I got in the program a day later than I should have. So they had their first day, and then I joined the day after because of flights in fucking Canada. I will not talk. So I was a day behind of everyone. And so like my introduction and my knowledge of the program wasn't as good as what everyone else's was because I didn't have that day one. But essentially, Ron, we had a team meeting and he was like, introduce yourself. So I was like, Manny. And then he was like, what's your goals for this program? And I was like, well, my goal is to make sure that you have an easier job. So make your job easier. So I didn't mind shitty tasks. I didn't mind cleaning the racks. I didn't mind cleaning up the shop, taking the water to the fountain. Like I became really good at doing the small tasks. The more I did the small tasks, the more tasks I was given. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because they saw your value and they saw how you were able to really make everybody's experience there better. We were talking about this earlier about improving the experience of everybody is going to improve the outputs and work that's being done. And things as little as that make make everybody feel
Mhm.
good and feel appreciated and feel important, but also feels like you care. You care about the program and you care about the system and care about the development and you care about everybody else if you're doing things that you don't need to be doing.
To the point that we were talking about earlier as well, it's the eye for detail as well. So like it could be something minuscule as like the iPads. Like I would get in half hour earlier to make sure that all the iPads and the BBTs were all out and prepped for the session. And like if there was an update, I would just do the update right then and there, making sure that everything was ready to go when we were.
Yeah, those things can't be understated. Preparation is I mean, we're in the field of preparation, so when we prepare to prepare, we're just following our own orders in a sense.
Yeah, there's a saying, it's "Fail to prepare, prepare to fail." That was something that my rugby coach used to tell me when we were training and whatever else. Like when I didn't want to do those shitty reps. Fail to prepare, prepare to fail.
Isn't that Winston Churchill that said that?
Might be.
I think it was Winston Churchill, which was trying to give you some great British kudos.
Benjamin Franklin.
Ooh, Benjamin Franklin. No way.
Yeah. So the original quote is, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail.
Dang. I think Benjamin Franklin has a bunch of conditioning bangers if you really want to get into it. He also said early and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and yoked.
It's just fucking small.
Or maybe early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and gives him buys.
No, but it's, yeah. I think the developing of the field, we have to rely on the ones coming up from under us. So it's like, how do we ensure that they have the best chance at becoming something great in the field?
I mean, like you said, the preparation makes them feel important, and that has profound downstream effects in terms of the day. We say win the day, and you do these things to make people feel like they had a good experience in their training, and you're gonna create a better experience. You're gonna create a better experience and better outputs in their training.
Yeah. One thing that I learned in the US, I brought back, is their level of appreciation for everyone involved, if that makes sense. Like at the end of the session, the athletes would come up and say, "I appreciate you for today, coach." Like it's something very simple that you can just say, and it changes that person's day.
I mean, not only that, but you string enough of those days together and you change that'll end up changing their life, which makes me want to ask another question is how would you compare the coach that you are today versus the coach you were back then?
I'm more present. So I learned that when you're a strength and conditioning coach, first off, we're in the business of growing people and functional members of society. So showing up for the just quiet weight room time, can I get them through this session? It becomes a thing of, if they feel any pains and niggles, how can we help them get over them so that they can perform comfortably? We are also essentially also unglorified psychologists, right? Like they'll come with a million and one problems, and we just have to cipher through them, make it through their session. So it's I think, yeah, I'm more proud of the fact that I don't mind taking a little bit extra time out of my day to learn about them, to make sure that there's that relationship, that they know whatever happens, I'm there for the human as opposed to just that.
I mean, not only that, but the athletes, they find inspiration from their coaches and they draw from the motivation from their coaches. So if they're starting to waver in their inspiration and motivation, then it's part of our responsibility to ensure that we can give them fuel for their fire, or at least help them find resolve to let them feel that it's okay to feel the way that they do if they need to pivot in their lives. Like you said, like the psychology is really important, and giving and helping the athletes cultivate their purpose and using that as part of their reason for sport I think is part of our jobs. So I appreciate what you're saying in terms of how you believe in nurturing your athletes and giving and creating an environment for them to really feel like they're important.
100%. I think that's, so again, going back to Coach Mark, and I saw, so at the end of each season or recruitment, he has one-to-ones with all his athletes. He asks them what's his goals and whatever else, what's your why, which is all good and dandy, but he uses it to motivate them. So, like, he'll recall exactly what they said every single time he needs it. So like we were doing math testing. There's a certain player who thought he was done, and Coach Mark turns to him and "I thought you wanted to go to the league. To get to the league, you need to do this." And I was kinda like, "Fuck, he remembers all this shit."
Wow. That's like, I think that's the most powerful thing you can do as a coach is to remember the moments that you share with your athletes and then bring it back to them because that shows that the relationship is important and also the ownership that you have as a coach in their development. It's like you're taking ownership over of that responsibility and that relationship that you're cultivating with them. It's creating the accountability that like, hey, I remembered what it is that you wanted from me and what you wanted from yourself. And here I am reminding you of what it is that you told me.
Mhm.
That's a
It's
really
also
interesting coach.
sorry, go on.
No, no, it's okay. I just wanted to say that's a really interesting coaching practice that you bring up because, I appreciate that and I could integrate something like that into my own practice and really utilize something like that just to improve the interpersonal relationship with the athletes in order to get a better relationship with them. And
Yeah.
I like that.
I think it doesn't necessarily then mean it's just an I goal, it's a we goal. I think if they know that you're into their goal as much as they are, they have some of that validation with their goal. And then it becomes like oh fuck, if coach got me on this and he knows my goal and we're training towards my goal because he's recalled it back to me,
Yeah.
you get extra buy-in from them.
I mean, if you're working with athletes that are on the fence, then it's necessary. It's definitely I mean, I think in college sports, it's definitely more important because the athletes are still in the process of developing their identity as well as developing their habits as an athlete as they become professional if they're going to be professional. And most won't. So just being able to at least hold themselves accountable to their own goals is a lifelong process that they really need to cultivate and develop.
100%. No, it's again, yeah. So your question, I think I'm more present on the coaching side. Whereas like I think before I thought I knew everything and everything was like measured data and all that stuff. But I care more about the actual coaching now and being there.
It's funny how that works out, huh?
Yeah,
It'll probably go back full cycle. You'll start to
100%.
get back you'll probably now that you got the soft skills down again, you're gonna go back into managing the data and trying to see, I wonder how this data affects their moods, etc. Which I think
Yeah,
is actually where they're
yeah,
kind of moving into a little bit because, like as you saying, that there's a push to move into microcycle management as opposed to macro cycle and block management. And now that there's more data, especially about mood states and physiological responses, there's going to be a more of a profound experience, profound insight into how is our physiology affecting our mood. And there's going to be
yeah.
hard numbers for this.
I think so I have a really hard time reading research recently because it's one thing to research, another thing to do. Like with research, every variable is controlled, right? So I've now found myself reading the methodologies first because like a paper isn't going to tell me much about leg strength if they're testing leg strength on a leg press, right? Like a lot of stabilizing muscles are taken away there. It's not really leg strength or core strength, which is fine, but at least say core strength, right? And so it, yeah, I think reading research is great, but it has to be applicable to the field.
Yeah, I know what you mean about reading research because it's such a closed system in small controlled variables that really you're only seeing outcomes given a specific situation, but the reality is nowhere near this. One thing that, but to that point, one thing that I've been able to do with research that I feel, is a good perspective is that research just goes to show what questions people are asking and how they go about trying to answer those questions. And I think one thing that, as humans that we have to really work on as much as we can is our critical thinking. And that all comes down to the questions that we ask and how we go about to solving those questions. And I think that right now, we have answers at our fingertips for everything, and now it's even easier to get any answer for anything, even fabricated answers. And so, but at the end of the day, the questions are the most important part. And the questions that people are putting in the research is kind of showing where's the consciousness of our field moving and what is it carrying with it in terms of the knowledge bubble and the paradigm of training.
100%. I also kind of wanted to throw it back on you now. What are some things that, or some differences between when you were an intern to the coach you are now?
You know, kind of ironically, I've never been an intern. When I moved to Colorado Springs as a wrestler, I was just thrown into the fire as a full-time athlete. And I just graduated from UC Davis with a degree in exercise biology. And I was really lucky there to like study under some of the best professors in the country. Dr. Keith Barr was one of my professors, and now he's like, at that time, he was starting his tendon research. And now all of his tendon research is like really kind of coming to the surface about how the importance and the adaptability of collagen and tendon tissue. And so, anyways, I had this really strong background in physiology. And then when I went to start wrestling with the team, we had a strength and conditioning coach and an intern there that were just awesome people. Guy there, his name was Rob, and his intern named Brandon Sakel. They were together. Yeah, Dr. Keith Barr, that's the guy. And they had awesome training. And I just kept on asking them questions about what they thought about the training. And every now and then I'd bring in research papers that I was reading with respect to their training methods and asking them what is their experience with these things, and then asking questions like you were saying. But I was doing it as an athlete because I was genuinely interested in their methodology. And at one point they said, why don't you join our staff? And I said, "Does that
Mm.
require I have to stop wrestling?" And they said, "Yeah, it does." And then I said, "Well, I'm just gonna pass that." So then, like, a couple of years went by, and then they left the organization. Rob went into the, special forces with the Green Berets, and there was a hole in the hiring for the US Olympic Committee, and USA Wrestling didn't have a strength and conditioning coach, and they asked me to do it. And so I did it, and I stepped up, and I was essentially an athlete coach for the next 4 to 7 years. You could say 4 to 7 years because during COVID, we kind of all disbanded, and that's when I opened a gym and invited everybody to train. Then we continued to train until Tokyo and a little bit after Tokyo for 2 years. But needless to say, at that time, essentially, they just like threw me to the fire, and I was learning hard as I went. You know, it was easy. The easiest part was like engaging with the athletes because we were training together. We had been training together for 5 years already, so I knew everybody. We already had good relationships, and I was doing the training with the athletes too. So it was like almost like a team captain leading the training, doing the training, going through everything together. And so that was like the way it went. And then then myself and all the other coaches, we would have our meetings about like, what's the training plan? What's the periodization? What's this? And then they put in a lot of trust in me in dealing with the periodization of our training team and our plan. And the most difficult thing that I had was with working with administration. I had absolutely no professional administration skills, and that was like really, really hard for me. And especially because I wasn't like in their email system. And so like no emails, I didn't receive any emails. They would always kind of bounce back to me, or they would always bounce back or just get kind of lost in the sauce or lost into the thing. And that bit me later down the line, but I was learning these professional skills. And so as a coach at that point, what I really had learned now is that the importance of dealing with your administration is just as important as dealing with your team, because the team isn't just the athletes, the team is the whole organization. And you really have to work together towards your collective goals if you want to accomplish things, because everybody needs to be on the same page. And everybody needs to be part of the process, and everybody wants to be part of the process. Like, we're in sports because we want to win, we want to train. Everybody's got really good training ideas. And I think, just so eager to just learn and pick people's brains all the time that maybe it kind of came off as like a little too amateur. But when really I was just hungry for knowledge. And I really needed to, and I really learned later how to deal with professional organizations in a better way. And now with the Chinese Olympic Committee, it's like the professional part of it is like it's buttoned up to the highest level. Like there's no room for error in any way. And also there's just a different type of leadership structure that is in Chinese culture in general. And so I've also learned to adapt to that sort of to that environment as well. But what I did learn back then that I've appreciated now was the best way to really build trust with your athletes is to demonstrate trust in them and creating that two-way dynamic in meeting an athlete where they are at, but also holding them to a really, really high standard because you hold yourself to that standard. And so creating that relationship and being transparent about that is, I think, extremely important towards longevity with your team and mental health of the athlete, but also motivation and inspiration to that athlete. And so, I mean, I could talk about like methodology of training that has changed, but those are just all really all it's mostly details and it's mostly the ability to adapt to training situations and executing strategies and adaptations while minimizing error. And at the highest level of training, it's not necessarily how good your training is, it's more there's also an equal opposite part, which is also how bad your training isn't. There's significantly less leeway for making mistakes in any capacity at any level. Like I think, you know, it's really easy to ruin great athletes. And the problem is that great athletes can even win in spite of bad coaching. So there's like this really difficult balance of like trying to ensure that like you don't take too much credit for what your athletes already capable of doing without you, and then recognizing that we're just here to help them on their journey. We're not here.
I think that's kind of tapping into the, I mean, you've probably heard of it, the strong act that's happening in the US.
Yes, I have heard about the legitimacy that's going on within the strength and
Yeah.
conditioning field.
And I think that that will eliminate all of the illegitimate coaches, if that makes sense. I just have to S&C Coach. I think, how can I say this without sounding like, I don't like being called a personal trainer. It's one thing that you cannot call me because I did a 4 years degree and, you know, I do all this continued learning. I've got accreditations, I've got letters, I've got whatever. Like I've got it. So calling me a personal trainer, I'm not a fan because I didn't just take a couple weekend course. I studied for this shit. So I was at the doctor's the other day, and the doctor was kind of asking me, "Oh, so what is it that you do?" I was like, "I coach people in the gym, you know, athletes and whatever else." And he was like, "Oh, so you're a PT?" I was like, "No." So then I kind of explained to him what the differences were, and he was like, "So it's kind of like the self-proclaimed physiotherapist is that actually just a sports massage course? I think they're full-blown physiotherapists." And I was like, "Yes, exactly.
Actually, I mean, technically, we pick up where the physiotherapists leave off. So,
Yes."
like, if a physiotherapist does their job properly, then we can take them to the next level. So, you know, it's all on the same line, you know?
No, but so I not in the US, there's different laws in the US that stop this from happening. But in Europe and the UK, you can do like a sports massage course and you can massage people.
There's always loopholes.
Yes. So you're not
Yeah,
sports
it's kind of
therapist. Yeah, yeah.
it's like ART. Like, you can get certified in ART, and therefore you can start doing massage for athletes if you're like a coach, a strength and conditioning coach. And you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. So it's
But
yeah.
I know what you mean about the labels in terms of the coaching. I just read this book called The Director's Manual by Nick DeMarco, and something that he wrote in there was really important point was that the labels that you hold are really important because they define your role and they define how others interpret your role and the perspective that they have on your role. So if you call yourself a director of performance, but you're a strength and conditioning coach, then people are going to assume your roles differently. Or if they call you a personal trainer, but you're a strength and conditioning coach, they're going to assume you work with one person. You know, and in an intimate setting. So it's really important to hold these labels because they define the language defines our reality, and this is also how we interpret and perceive each other and the circumstances that we're in. So I think that you're not being a dick by saying you don't want to be called a personal trainer. It's more so like you just want to be perceived accurately given the situations that you're in, the people you deal with, and the circumstances that you train people with. I think that's totally fair.
100%. I'm going to steal that from you. Morgan, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. I think I was kind of talking to you about at the beginning, but it's these conversations that I value. It's the yes, the X's and O's are great. Like, let me get into the psychology of my athletes, the interpersonal skills that really make the most value for the time that we have with them. No, it was a statement. That's why I like these conversations.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this conversation's been wonderful. It was great to get to know a little bit about your experience as an intern and how you felt like the questions that you were leading with were ultimately what opened the doors for your future as a training and conditioning coach. And clearly it's actually led you into this avenue of life with podcasting, which has enabled you to have such great interviews with great people. And it's been wonderful. I really am thankful to like have this time with you, and I feel honored that you said all those really kind things about me, and that other people said kind things too. I mean,
No, so
I really appreciated your podcast because I thought you asked really good questions on those podcasts, and so that's wonderful. It's really admirable trait of yours.
so I also think that coaches need to be praised for what they're doing well. Because like we can all get in this cycle of, oh fuck, I can do this better, or XYZ is doing this, so I need to change up whatever else. And I think we need to tell each other that what you're doing right now is fucking stupid. So when I say those things, one, I mean them because I wouldn't say something I don't mean. I actually have this point in my presentations. It's say what you mean what you say. If I say something, it's because I full heartedly stand. And then I like celebrating people's wins in the sense that if they're like, oh, look, I'll preface this. So I believe that we can agree on 95% of our methodologies, our principles, our philosophy. But it's how we navigate the 5% that determines how effective of a coach we are. Because like we on paper disagree on periodization, right? And never caused a fight with us. Like you you mentioned that that's my system. I told you my system, and we can safely move on because that's your system that works for you. That's my system that works for me. So I really like this where it doesn't need to be a full one.
Yeah, we didn't even get into the weeds about why, what outcomes have you seen from your training that has led you to get into that system versus myself with my system. Those are maybe a conversation for another day, getting into the X's and O's, as you say. But these differences is what creates interesting conversations in and of themselves, because we can discuss two different experiences and two different perspectives on training. And if we were all just doing the same thing, then we would never know what the benefits and the drawbacks of each tool is. And that's our disservice to everybody. I think you're muted, dude.
Yeah, sorry. I think there's two parts to this. One, I always explain to this. I never disagree into arguments over methods because one, I've not had your internships, I've not had your athletes, I've not had some of the situations that you've had. So I can in good faith argue over specifics if I've not had the same
Yeah.
experience as you. And two, to a point that you made and we sort of spoke about off air is we also need to know how to effectively determine how successful we are as coaches, not just because our athletes won, but like how we were as coaches impacting that system.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the success that we have as coaches is, it's a different, it's not reliant on the success of the athletes. It's reliant on how, it's reliant on the relationships that we have and the way that we're able to build them with the athletes, both as so that way they can get the most out of their own lives. And then the sport performance has to be an element of this, and creating that balance to ultimately get the higher sport performance should be the aim, but it shouldn't be mutually exclusive. And to me, this is the highest form of coaching.
Morgan, really appreciate you again for coming on. If you can sort of let people know where they can reach out to you and ask more questions if they want to.
Yeah, my Instagram is Mogo Training, and so you can just come to my Instagram there, and you can see what I'm up to with Team China. You can see what I'm up to in terms of reviewing training, and I'll be putting more effort into it soon, with regards to strength and conditioning research and with an emphasis in wrestling. But I'm also a big fan of holistic development because I believe that ultimately the highest performance is predicated on a healthy, holistically established individual. And the realization of the highest performance comes as a result of a strong foundation. So that's a little bit of a quip into my philosophy. And you can find me on Mogo Training on pretty much anything. Mogo Training on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, but mostly on Instagram. And you can DM me there or email me at mtflaharty@gmail.com.
Perfect. Appreciate you so much. Have a good day. Peace.
All right, thanks, Manny.